And thank you to the Alliance for Aging Research and to Sue Peshin for doing this, for this award. It's great to be here, and I thank all of you in the audience tonight, many of you I know, for supporting aging research. You know, aging research really is about diseases of aging. It's about the fact that as we get older, we become more susceptible to the big diseases that threaten healthy aging: heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, stroke. And it's nice to know I'm surrounded here by so many people who care about having a healthier health span, so to speak, for those who are getting older. You know, I first met Sue Peshin's predecessor, the legendary Dan Perry, 25 or so years ago. We were both younger then. And it was in New Mexico shooting pool. He's a really good pool player. I'm very lucky I didn't bet. And then we were playing poker. And we played poker with Roy Walford, who's famous for doing the Biosphere, the late Roy Walford. And if you remember this, we were using we didn't have any chips, so we tore matches out of a matchbook. And I'm not sure what each match was worth, but I know at the very end, I had none and Dan had most of them. So I can tell you that he's a great poker player. So anyway, Dan and I have had a very special relationship, and I really appreciate your support of my own career and work over the years, Dan. It really has meant a lot to me. In my own research, you know, back then in those days when at the meeting we were at, we went to these aging meetings and we talked about lifespan. It was always about lifespan and longevity. How do we increase longevity? And what we didn't talk enough about was health span. And now when you consider that lifespan is about 80 years old, and for people in this room who are 40 or under, you can expect to probably live till 85 or 90. Think about the fact that at 85, 40 to 50% of the population are in the early stages or in the mid to late stages of Alzheimer's dementia. 40 to 50% at 85. Our lifespan's 80. So our lifespan has far, far exceeded and outpaced our health span, particularly our brain health span. And this is a huge issue because this disease, Alzheimer's disease, that I've dedicated my own career to, is just absolutely unacceptable. I don't know what other word to use for it, because all of us, you know, you're born, you have your family, your childhood, you grow up, you have your best friends, you have your spouse, your kids. All of these things are creating for you your memories, creating this tapestry of your life, your experiences, your memories that not only you enjoy, but you share with your loved ones, and it's how we know each other. We know each other by our experiences and who we've become throughout life, and especially sharing those experiences with our loved ones. And then this disease takes that tapestry and just tears it apart, thread by thread. And it just robs you of who you are, robs you of yourself, and robs your loved ones of who you are. And when you think about how terrible a notion this is, and how prevalent this disease is, and how long we're living, and that we have very little handle on stopping this disease, you know, here in Washington, we should just stop right now and say, wait a minute, you know, this is an urgent situation. This is a crisis. This is an epidemic, not just financially and economically, but in terms of burden on families, burden on caregivers. And I think if I had to go through, you know, what are the bullets for what we learned that was most important over the last few years? We learned from our mistakes, right? So we've seen so many trials fail. We got sick of reading in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times about failed trials. And most of these trials that failed were targeting amyloid, the beta amyloid. In my own career, I chased beta amyloid my whole scientific career. Back in the early 80s, after working with Jim Gassell on Huntington's, I was trying to map chromosome 21 from end to end. This was pre-human genome, to study Down syndrome. And when I learned, really in a paper by George Glenner, who first discovered the amyloid plaque is made of this little peptide called amyloid beta protein, that Down syndrome patients inevitably get Alzheimer's pathology, it led to the idea that there would be a gene on chromosome 21 for Alzheimer's. And George Glenner, the late George Glenner, who I think if he was alive would be the only person eligible today for a Nobel Prize in Alzheimer's, said, I bet you there's a gene for amyloid on chromosome 21 because of the Down syndrome link. And he was right. And I became very close with George in the years, you know, before he passed, and And he kept saying, stick with the amyloid, don't worry about the naysayers, because from the very beginning, there were those who said, it's amyloid, no, it's tangles, and there was fights. There were the amyloid people, there were the tangle people. And when the amyloid trials failed, everyone said, see, you amyloid guys were wrong. We tried the amyloid drugs. Some of them weren't very good, but a lot of the good ones that actually clear amyloid from the brain still failed. And then what we learned is that amyloid accumulates in the brain, the plaques accumulate in the brain 20 to 25 years before symptoms. So when we were taking full-blown patients, Alzheimer's patients, and giving them drugs to stop amyloid, it was like having a patient who had just had a heart attack with congestive heart failure, goes to the cardiologist and they say, here, just take a Lipitor, right? You had to take cholesterol down 15 years ago to stop that clinical symptom of a heart attack later. So I think what we've learned that Alzheimer's disease has two phases. There's the pre-dementia stage and dementia stage. When you have a patient with cancer with no symptoms, with a tumor, you still say it's a cancer patient, right? You don't wait until the patient's in pain in bed or with organ failure to say they have cancer. As long as you know there's a tumor with no other symptoms, they have cancer. I think we need a paradigm shift, and this might be politically and socially difficult. But I was discussing this today with Senator Markey, that we need a paradigm shift that Alzheimer's is beginning 20 years before symptoms. It is Alzheimer's. The pathology is beginning just like the tumor is growing. There are just no symptoms yet. We don't call it Alzheimer's until I was going to say something hits the fan, but I'm not going to say that. But we don't call it Alzheimer's until the patient's actually suffering from dementia. And that's probably the wrong way to look at this disease. If we're going to stop this disease, we need to know early on that they have excessive amounts of amyloid in their brain and they're on their way. So then you might say, well, there's this controversy. How do we know amyloid causes the disease? And this is where Alzheimer's in a dish came in. This is why, to me, Alzheimer's in a dish was important. And really, the credit for Alzheimer's in a dish goes just as much to my colleague, Do-Yeon Kim, who very, very talented Korean scientist who's been in my unit for a long time. And it was his idea when he said, when we were trying to grow these stem cells and turn them into neurons and recapitulate plaques and tangles in liquid in a dish, and nothing happened. And he said, one day he just said, Dr. Tanzi, the brain's not made of liquid. And the brain's made of gel. I mean, our brain is 3 pounds of Jell-O that would quiver like Jell-O if you didn't have a skull holding it together. And the fact is, it's just the simplest things, right? So when we did all these experiments instead and had these neurons from stem cells grow amyloid in gel, and now the amyloid could accumulate, neurons were making connections, next thing you know, definitive proof, no doubt about it, no one argued with it. 6 weeks, you see the plaques. Wait 2 more weeks, you see the tangles. Add drugs that stop the plaques, you stop the tangles. Simple as that. There are many ways to get the tangles. The tangles are killing the neurons from inside. The tangles are spreading through the brain like a fire in the brain. Tangles can be caused by head bangs, concussions, bomb blasts, frontotemporal lobar dementia, other ways to get tauopathy, as it's called, or tangles. But in Alzheimer's, it's the accumulation of amyloid that gets you there. And that accumulation of amyloid takes place 20 years before. And now we can image for amyloid and know who's in trouble. So as new drugs come on the market or come through clinical trials, we're working on a couple. There's Biogen working on this, Lilly, many of the pharmaceutical companies. When we have some good drugs to stop amyloid, the vision will be that we eradicate Alzheimer's with early prediction, early detection, early intervention. Early prediction means you keep track of your family history and your genetics so that you know roughly at what age you might consider yourself at risk for the disease, and start being checked for that pathology 20 years before that. For some people, that might be 30 years old or 20 years old. For most, it will probably be 40 or 50 years old. Once you know when to be vigilant about detection, you have your amyloid imaged. We can do that now. You might look for evidence of tangles in a spinal tap. There's new technology coming online to look for evidence of tangles doing a blood test. And if it looks like you're in trouble and there's a high prediction that you're on your way to Alzheimer's 15, 20 years before, you start doing something about it. Very similar to checking your cholesterol levels or having a CT scan for calcification and knowing you have to get on a cholesterol-lowering drug 15, 20 years before there's going to be a heart attack, and you stop that incidence of heart disease. Just like the NIH lowered the incidence of heart disease so dramatically, the NIH can do the same thing and lower the incidence of Alzheimer's by tracking amyloid. Now we have the evidence to say, yes, that is the right thing. We have the technology to do it. So I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic because I have Cure Alzheimer's Fund and who funded the Alzheimer's Initiative study. Before our paper was even published in Nature, the NIA gave us an R01 and leveraged that funding to even greater amounts for us to go further with it. It's a great partnership between a foundation and a federal funding agency. It's working. Love to see more of that. But the fact is that we need foundations. We need groups like the Alliance to keep supporting the NIH, to keep supporting research. Because I firmly believe that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on Alzheimer's now. We know what we have to do. That first drug that can safely lower that amyloid, start getting it into people as soon as you're seeing amyloid accumulating in their brain to alarming levels. And we're going to eradicate this disease, nip it in the bud before it strikes. Early prediction, early detection, early intervention. So that's really all I wanted to say. And I just want to thank all of you for taking time tonight to be here, to support aging research, to talk a little bit about the brain and Alzheimer's. And I think if we really work together at all levels, at the level of families, clinicians, researchers, federal funding agencies, government, industry, we can get the job done. And it's already showing that we've come so far just in the last year. It's unbelievable, the quantum progress we've made in the last year. So let's keep it going. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for this award.